Wait, I got something to trade you.
Thanks for catching me. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to our afternoon session. This session has no name, but it is a collection of really good projects that we wanted to make sure we presented to you. So there's no real theme dragging these through together, except that, you know, like all good wildflower fields, there's lots of good color in here. So sit back, enjoy. First up, we're going to have Renee Mashing come and speak about their project and do a presentation. And then we have the Willow Warriors Story will be coming up. And Jessica talking about holistic and cultural safe STBBI healthcare. And then Chelsea Perry talking about the impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic. So sit back, enjoy. A couple other things, make sure you guys do the feedback on feed loop. Oh, I said that right today. As well as answer the questions on the flip chart, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. That was very generous. And so my name gets to be the first presenter, but this is actually a presentation that has been prepared by myself, by Patrice, who will be presenting with me, and our colleagues Carrie Martin and Rajesh are also online and will be part of our question and answer period. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about recognition of the sexual and reproductive health and rights for Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse communities with HIV. We're really good with titles in this presentation. To begin in a good way and respectfully, we want to acknowledge the territory that we're gathered on and to humbly express our appreciation and thanks for the opportunity to be here. And in that regard, to recognize that this is land that was the traditional territory of Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Assiniboine, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and that it's recognized as Treaty 1 territory. And this is also the homeland and the heartland of the Red River Métis. So being in this place is a wonderful gift and most appreciated. So just to give you a quick snapshot, I'm going to give you the history and then Patricia is going to tell you all the good stuff that's coming. So this project began because the United Nations Interagency Support Group began to look at thematic issues related to sexual, reproductive health and rights of Indigenous peoples back in 2014, so 8 years ago. In 2017, the World Health Organization released a consolidated guideline on sexual and reproductive health and rights of women living with HIV. 73 recommendations, good practice statements that were grounded in recognizing gender equality and human rights. There were notes about planning, about development, about monitoring and the promotion of programs and services. And while there was some indication of Indigenous issues, we felt that there could be more attention. So the reports highlighted that there is inequitable access to quality health services for Indigenous women living with HIV, that there is a disproportionate vulnerability related to gender violence and violations of sexual and reproductive health rights. We know that there's more to that story. So while both of these reports recognize the right for Indigenous people to control their own health systems and highlighted global data that showed that there could be, or there was a need for a comprehensive sexual and reproductive health and rights system, that system needs to pay attention to individuals at early ages, young people, needed to be sustainable. We all know the joy of short-term programs and projects and interventions. It needed to be able to evolve over several years to include parents, communities, educators, change makers, and also needed to consider local socioeconomic contexts. So lots of material that was needed, lots of ideas, lots of indications about this is what we should do. So we thought, well, maybe there's something that we should do too. And just, to have a little bit of humble pie, we started off with this really great opportunity and invitation to submit a proposal to CanWatch, the Canadian Collaborative for Global Health. And it was a really interesting process. It was a new place for us to apply for funding. And so in June 2018, we pulled together our good friend Trevor Staton, who we've all heard about, has been working with our international community. He helped us to connect in various countries, particularly engaging people from New Zealand, Guatemala, Uganda, Peru, India, and Ecuador. And we submitted this brilliant proposal. That didn't get funded. So they told us they really liked the idea, and they invited us to do presentations without any funding. And that was nice, and it was sincere, but we also kind of said, well, this is hard for us to do off the side of our desks. So what do you do when things don't work out? You try again. CIHR had a funding opportunity, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, for large projects called project scheme opportunities. And so we reached out to our original partners from 2018, and some of them said, yes, we'd love to be involved again. You'll see that Uganda is not on this list, and Ecuador is not on this list, but we've brought in Nepal and Nigeria. So 7 countries, Indigenous peoples from 7 different countries, including Canada, have come together to address sexual and reproductive health and rights for Indigenous women and girls, and inclusive. And we've been mindful of making sure that there's room and inclusion for Indigenous men and boys. Now, I find it kind of interesting that this slide got cut off in that blue box, because the full title, the full official title of our project is International Indigenous-led Mobilization of the United Nations Interagency Support Group on Indigenous Issues and the WHO Consolidated Guidelines of Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights of Indigenous Women and Girls, leading an intersectoral response through community-driven self-determination. I'm never going to be teased again about how I name things. This isn't my title. So in short, this is the International Indigenous Women and Girls Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Project. And we got funding in March 2021, right in the middle of COVID, but really exciting, millions of dollars for us to be able to do this work together. And particularly credit to the team, because I was only a small part of the team that wrote this. We scored first in the funding competition. So we're really excited, hard work. You know, if at first you don't succeed, true, try again. So I don't want to take up too much time. So really, we wanted to shape this in this partnership with 7 different countries, recognizing that we all have our own Indigenous ways of knowing and doing and being. So culture and cultural context and respect and learning and opportunities to come together frames all of the work that we want to be doing. And we've kind of made this linear process, and we all know nothing happens in a straight line. So ideally, roughly, what we plan to do is begin by looking at the literature, do a scoping review, learn and see what other people have already recognized and written about. Based on what we learn from the literature, what we learn from our time together in our meetings, we want to develop focus group discussions, FGDs. And with those focus groups, have a common set of questions that we can ask across all 7 countries. And there'll be specific questions for each country as well. So we're going to learn about, what are our common threads? What are our key issues? We're going to use that information to develop a survey. We're going to use that survey to be implemented again in each country. Maybe there's 10 questions that are the same and 4 or 5 questions that are country specific, because we all have different contexts. And we're going to bring all of that together so that we can both sing with one voice at the international level about the needs and issues of Indigenous women and girls and our families, but also be able to work at our country level to say, hey, we've learned about this internationally, and we know this is happening in our country. So really to serve the needs of our Indigenous partners in the best way possible to move our work forward domestically and internationally. And we're all on a bit of a learning curve for how to make this happen. So that will lead to developing a toolkit that is meant to help support sexual and reproductive health and rights, and to really ground the needs for and responding to care for our women living with HIV. And of course, evaluate everything along the way. Now, I'm taking too much time, so I'm going to just really huge compliments. Allison, who you met this morning, did this amazing work to help us to bring to life the organizational chart for our project. So at the heart is a global, the grant holders, the people who are responsible for managing, and this project is actually housed within CAN. Around that, we have Patricia and the work of managing the project, and around that, advisors with elders and team members. And then each country is its own little node. So again, we'll have a country-specific advisory council, we'll have community research associates, watch for those job postings, and we're also going to have a country-specific research coordinator. So, and you'll see that each country is represented there. This is what we're thinking we're going to bring to life. over to you.
So the work that we have done since the beginning, we started with an initial ceremony in August 6th. We have two elders and we have a water ceremony and wampum bell ceremony. An artist created a beautiful wampum bell with that is every country is represented with a human figure. And we brought this wampum bell for this ceremony. We celebrated the World Sexual Day, and we had conferences from India, Nigeria, Canada, and Peru. We are working on the scoping review that will be the base for developing, even though the project have the research questions, every country is going to develop their own research question according with their circumstances. So the scoping review will bring us the base to develop these questions. Every country is now also on the application for the ethics research approval that we need because we are working with people, and they are working also in the action plans. We developed a webinar series between March and April with participation of the WHO and the PAHO, and every country developed one webinar. And we have begun the process of recruiting team members for the country advisory committee that Rene was talking about, and we hope to have at least 10 women living with HIV for this advisory council. Finally, after the releasing of the pandemic measurements, we are going to have the first in-person meeting with the team, and this meeting will be in Nepal.
Namaste, this is Rajesh Didia from Nepal. The presentation is about Nepal visit with the CAN. And this visit is a crafting historical momentum by 7 motherlands in Nepal with CAN. So it is a way of seeing another culture live and breathe, connecting to the local land. So you can get to see the what behind the facade and formers. Learning will be to learn how to live locally, how to live traditionally, and how to adopt local atmosphere, connecting with land, connecting with water, and connecting with air. So this visit will allow us to connect with the another motherland tradition, culture, and historical environment. And we will adopt localized lifestyle of Nepali people. And each and every motherlands, they have lots of taboos, different type of. So this visit will be a milestone to break the myths and taboos in SRHR and indigenous community of Nepal. Natural beauty, cultural beauty of Nepal, traditional beauty of Nepal, and indigenous beauty of Nepal will be witnessed during the visit. So Swayambhunath, a place to feel holy atmosphere, eyewitness of Buddha eye, religious friendly air, and Buddha eyes known as Monkey Temple. Pashupatinath, it believes that who dies in this place will reborn as a human. An astrologer of this place will predict exact date and time of date. So in this place, we will feel the date in each and every step and each and every corner of Pashupatinath. And it believes that if you visit once there, all the mistakes and worsen act or karma will be obligated, will be reduced or forgiven by the Lord Shiva. So this will be the walk of life for us in Pashupatinath. This is the place where we visit orphanage school, where indigenous children are studying. And we will see the champions here, and as well as we will see the struggling for food, shelter, and education among indigenous children in Nepal. This is Lord Buddha's born place, Lumbini. We will feel the holy environment and meditationable atmosphere during this visit. This is Pokhara. In Pokhara, we will feel the natural mystic mountains and lakes, and we will see the cultural beauty here during this visit. Nagarkot, it's a hill, 72,000 feet high. We will see the range of mountains, sunset or sunrise, and then we will feel local tradition and culture here. So no matter how you read about another culture, there is nothing quite like taking a local about their experience. This makes us a wonderful trip in Nepal. Thank you. Namaste on the behalf of Suruat.
Namaste, Rajesh, and thank you. So this is the findings that we have from the webinar series. There are some findings that are general and there are some that are particular but are very relevant. One is the low priority that the government gives for reproductive health rights for indigenous women living with HIV at the policy level. So there is not too much policies in all these countries that are whose objectives are the women living with HIV. There are limitations in the education and health infrastructure to cover the specific needs of the indigenous women living with HIV. For example, in India, there are long distance for indigenous people to get health services, even normal health services, more with HIV services. And there have only access for ART treatments, centers, only 8 from 24. So it means that there are many indigenous communities without having access to HIV treatment. Guatemala, for example, is positioned as the Central American country with the highest rate of HIV infections. In Guatemala also, they have earlier pregnancies, and they have, for the last, for the 2020 statistics, girls between 10 and 14 years with pregnancies. There is not recognition of the indigenous rights-based approaches for the inherent rights, the treaty rights, and the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples. Even in Canada, there are indigenous women and girls with HIV. They go to mental health issues. And one of the biggest is the HIV stigma, discrimination, racism, sexism. And for example, the HIV stigma was reported for 57% of the women that were interviewed. Racism and sexism for around 30% of them. And also they have depressive symptoms, and around 47% of the women that were interviewed. The good thing is they have a lot of resilience and they are overcome all these circumstances. There is, I think the most important finding is that there is no data or there are sub-registration for indigenous women living with HIV across all the countries. And they think that they could be a higher than national average for sex and age in non-indigenous populations. And in some countries, still forced sterilization if the women is HIV positive. For example, in Canada in 2019, we had a case. These are the organization and institution involved in our project. One some for every country. And for us, the most important is the Canadian Institute of Health Research, but also we have the support from the Queen's University, University of Victoria, Toronto University. And these ones are the organizations that are working with us in the different countries, and we have the support from the WHO and the PAHO and the IPP network. Thank you so much. If you want more information, you can go to the CAN website or you can email to my email. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, do you have questions? No, Rajesh is there.
We do want to just take a moment to recognize, even from the internet, the excitement and enthusiasm and support of Sharp Doppler comes through. So Sharp has actually joined our Canadian team as an elder and advisor and is guiding us in our work and will be part of our adventures going forward. So Sharp, thank you for the good energy and the incredible support, and thank you, Cheri, for making sure Sharp's in the room. So we're looking forward to the next presentation when we tell you what we're learning.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
That is the best, longest name of any project I have ever heard. That's it. I don't even want to know what the acronym is, but that was awesome. Thank you very much, folks. Honor to be working with you guys as well, and connecting with you on this. Thank you. Next up, Miranda Keewatin. You want to come up and introduce your team and start your presentation? Just to remind you, it's about 20 minutes if you want to. All right, I'll be in the back letting you know. Talk however you would like. It is your show until I take you off the stage. No, thank you very much.
If the Willow Warriors would like to sit up here with me, you're more than welcome. I can see. So as they're coming up, I will just introduce myself. My name is Miranda Keewatin. I'm a MIYOWÂCIMOW from Papicasis Cree Nation, which is located in Treaty 4 territory. I am also a member of the Bear Clan. I was adopted in through this project, working with Elder Arnukumbedi McKenna. And so with that, I was really welcomed into that Bear Clan and with those teachings. So just let me start off with introducing the presentation. So the presentation is MIYOWÂCIMOW. She tells a good story, a Willow Warriors story, co-researchers that tell a narrative that focuses on intersectionality and Indigenous women's lives. One of the things that I want to do first is acknowledge the territory that we are facilitating this presentation, which is Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Ojai Cree, the Dene, Dakota, and the birthplace of the Métis Nation and the heart of the Métis Nation homeland. And all these pictures that are in my presentation are through our research journey through Chetwne. More than a decade, Indigenous-led research documents the impact of colonization on Indigenous women's personhood, families, political and spiritual life, work, and social systems. As a result, Indigenous women continue to be overrepresented in reports of experience with poverty, homelessness, ill health, addiction, trauma, child welfare, and violence. All Nations Hope Network responds to these needs of Indigenous women, and they have named in local research and to aim to develop evidence-informed, cultural responsive intervention that has the potential to address both the origin and the impact of these inequities. The goal of this study was to develop and implement and assess the impact of land and gender-based cultural interventions that address the risk behaviors of context of mental health, trauma, and foster wellness among Indigenous women served by All Nations Hope. We have achieved this goal through the exploration of the following questions of the CIPs. How do Indigenous women experience intervention practices in their social settings and social environments? In what ways do the CIPs influence women's experiences, physical wellness, through fitness and strength, stress? In what ways, if any, do the CIPs influence the women's experiences with relationship with themselves and spirit change? And what do women do to encourage wellness in their lives after participating in the CIP? This research focuses on Indigenous women from Saskatchewan, and it is about integrating wisdom from the variety of recently completed research projects that focused on various aspects of HIV risk prevention. This research is about intersectionality in Indigenous women's lives and how communities and systems can better work together with women and one another to deliver better, sustainable, and affordable integrated care. Intersectionality happens in a society at any time when a person has multiple forces of discrimination working against them. This can happen in all different types of situations. When it comes to who you are, there isn't just one part of that personality or identity that stands out. For example, you are not just a woman or a mother, you are a sister, a daughter. It is those that make up who we are, both of those identities. They both work together to make a unique personality and a sense of who we are or who you are. Intersectional theory or intersectionality works on those same principles. Intersectionality, there are multiple overlapping religion, language, gender, ability, sexual, race, occupation that can oppress a person or a group of people. And it marks their identity, like race or sexuality, that just doesn't exist separately. But they all overlap or interconnect when it comes to oppression or power. Today, when I speak about the Willow Warriors and their journey through Chetwne, they tell a narrative, of a story that they share together, experiences that they've worked, and together they heal each other, understanding that they are not alone. The Willow Warriors are the research trainees and the co-researchers for the Chetwne project. The Willow Warriors participate in a visioning retreat while continuing to represent the investment and benefits of strengthening and building the capacity of Indigenous communities. Going more into that, the Willow Warriors, at the beginning of the research project, we had a visioning retreat where they were involved with programming and services and what they wanted to see through the project. There was over 120 items or ideas that were listed, and through the last 36 months of this research project, we were able to attend and provide those services to the ladies, and not only that, but to the community during the time of COVID. The experience that's gained by the Willow Warriors demonstrates how resilient strong women are despite any adversity faced. The teachings by Elder Betty McKenna further this notion of resilience as they share that willow trees bend and blow in the wind, but never break, just like the Willow Warriors facing hardship. But ultimately, their strength conquers all. The Willow Warriors are a crucial element to creating a safe space for other women as they stand as role models from a diverse living experience, especially for those who are isolated. Monthly activities like Sweat Lodge, Moon Lodge, ceremonies, medicine gathering, processing, skirt making, drum making, land-based teaching, sharing circles, seasonal teachings have all been beneficial for the growth, development, and the well-being of the Willow Warriors. The Chetwne is about community and kinship. This is when women are stepping into the roles in their nation building, and ideally this research has informed and influenced new ways forward for Indigenous health that has grounded and informed by and analyzed through the Indigenous worldviews and theories. This project is about laying a foundation for implementing more comprehensive program of research focused on women and girls and rights and roles, to determine the impact of the CIPs as they can influence the experience of health and well-being over time. The long vision of is to amplify the impacts of this project for Indigenous people living in Regina through the integrated intervention research focused on nation building with families by integrating the research with women and men into a way of being that support for family and children. We build on what women have taught us through the research, and to date that deliver is sustained and opportunities for them to learn and grow as they can always Chetwne for themselves. At this time, I would ask the Willow Warriors to share a short narrative of their experiences and what they've been going through or how it has changed them. So, do I have to stand? Probably do it right now. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My spirit name is Yellow Thunderbird Woman, and my given name is Cheri Deegan. I'm registered to Standing Buffalo Dakota Nation. I'm a mother to 4 beautiful children and a grandma to 7 wonderful grandchildren. I was offered a spot into the Chetwne Willow Warrior program in 2019, and with great honor, I gladly accepted. Being a part of the Willow Warriors has taught me many meaningful teachings. The making of our hand drums was one, an important one for myself. How the beating of the drum represents Mother Earth's heartbeat, and how the 4-leggeds provided their hides. The trees did as well. When we completed our hand drums after our 4-day workshop, we blessed our drums with bear grease and sang Strong Woman's Song with Nook and Betty. The connection with my drum was an incredible feeling. Another teaching I feel is very important: tobacco is the ticket. If there's any questions about our culture, all we need to do is offer tobacco. I'm very proud of the knowledge I'm learning about our beautiful culture, along with the teachings. Very blessed to be on this journey with my beautiful Chetwne Willow Warrior sisters. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wahposssewywan. My given name is Sheila Geddes, and I'm from the George Gordon First Nation. I've been blessed with 11 children and 10 grandchildren. When I started the project, I was inspired by igniting my home fire and taking these teachings home to my children and my grandchildren. I can see the change in my younger children as they like to attend ceremony with me and smudge and pray together. My younger children know how to walk with the smudge around our home and to smudge everybody in our home. One of the teachings that stuck out to me was about picking medicines. I didn't know about the medicines when I went to my first medicine camp, and there was a lot of teachings there. Having the Chetwne sisters has given me strength to stand up and to be a proud First Nations woman, mother and grandmother. Hi.
Good afternoon, Tanse. My name is Danita Wahposssewywan. I have spirit's name, Lightning Rock Woman and Calls for Woman. I'm half Cree and half Soto. I come from Zigame, Anishinaabe First Nation, which is formerly Sakame, in Saskatchewan, Treaty 4. I'm a proud mother of 2. I have 9 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. This journey that we're on right now has really fulfilled my a lot of the ways of what I'm doing in my life today. It's brought me to a place of content, where I'm content in my life. The teachings that were given to us by numerous mentors, spiritual mentors and elders, have solidified my spiritual life. And going forward with that, it has gave me the ability to live life in a good way. I started this journey with a commitment. We were all given eagle feathers at the beginning, and I hold that eagle feather to my heart. And I know that with my sacredness, with my sacred items, that it is going to help me to live a good way. I really believe that, that women, we are life givers and we are healers. And as a mother, it has brought me to the realization that I'm taking care of my family and taking care of my grandchildren in a good way. And I do that with a lot of gratefulness, gratitude, and I know that I have a purpose here on earth. I'm also an HIV advocate and activist. So I I do the work, HIV work. I sit on the Acadian CAN board and different other committees. And in Regina, I have different roles that I play. And I work at different organizations. The one organization, um, anyone that I had AIDS programs Saskatchewan, I've been employed with since I was diagnosed in 2005. So I was hired full-time the following year. And in 2010, I was asked to create a support group. And it's called the Anyone at Risk Support Group, and it's been going on since 2010. And then so just also recently, because of the opiate crisis that we have all over, I was asked to also to create opiate support group for people with who are living actively using opiates. So I do 3 groups a week at All Nations Hope, and I really feel like, you know, we need to connect with our people who are struggling, our vulnerable people. Like they need us to be there, to help them. So I'm also got hired at Wellness Wheel Medical Outreach Clinic going on 2 years ago, and I'm the peer lead. And I also work in the hospital in acute care. So I go visit people who are in the hospital because of long-term infections like endocarditis and other kinds of long-term illnesses, and I go there and support them. Also bring cultural intervention into their lives, and I talk about what I do. I talk about my culture. I bring them beatings and do stuff with them that you know, like I'm a support worker, so I also help them with housing and things that they need in the community. And also coming up, I have a lot of training that I'm in charge of, peer training that we're doing land-based therapy pretty quick here. So I'm also proud to do that work too. I don't know. I think that everything that was shown to me by all the spiritual elders have really helped me to live life in a good way. And I love life. I love what I'm doing. And I'm thankful to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I was just given my time, how much time I left. I had a short video, and I know it's over time, so it's about 9 minutes long. Maybe there could be a way I could share it on ANHN's webpage or something. An app, okay, yeah, for sure. But it's definitely a beautiful video. It just brings together the Willow Warriors and their, you know, their testimony of their journey through Chetwne and being Willow Warriors and supporting each other as sisters and coming together and just uplifting each other, especially during COVID. Like, what a time to have a sisterhood that we can lean on and learn to sing together and learn to craft together and learn to heal together, cry and laugh. Like, we've did it all. And one of the things I want to acknowledge as being a part of the research, like the research journey as the Indigenous researcher, is that I've had the opportunity to be adopted into the Bear Clan. And not only that, but I'm proud to say that me and my sisters are on our berry fast, and we're not to be eating berries for a year. And so I just about got my muffin slapped out of my hand this morning. But that's the support I need too. So I'm very thankful, and I'm very honored to be here today and to share the work of what we've been doing in the last 36 months. So thank you so much, and thank you for listening to us. Hi. Oh, I guess I should show you guys the, wait, not that one. I'm trying to go to my end presentation. So. And these are the people that have helped us through the journey and also have given us direction and guidance. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing, ladies. Inspirational. Now I just want to call up Jessica. Please come up and you can introduce the rest of your team that has left you alone. And you can describe your project in 20 minutes. I'll let you know about time.
Please tell me when I have the 5 minutes left. because
Perfect.
of-
I can do that.
Okay, thank you. I will let this here. So, good afternoon. I am Jessica Naikun. I am a postdoctoral research at the Research Center of CHUM, the University Hospital of the University of Montreal. And I would like to start my presentation today with a sort of short, a personal note, but which is not that personal after all, is I would say a Pan-American history about colonization and dispossession and racism. And this is a family picture from my family back in Chile. I am a Métis Mapuche woman. And this is my great-grandmother, the mother of my grandfather on my father's side. And these are some of her grandchildren in Wahposssewywan, which is the name Mapuche people gave to their land, from current Chile and Argentina in the Patagonia region. And because of racism, my grandfather didn't learn us his language. So I barely know some words of Mapuche language and some few things about the culture. I received a rather or completely Western education, including studies in Europe, and English is just my third language, so apologies for any inconvenience in that regard. So yes, this is my history, and this is the first time, because of all this this connection with my culture of origin, this is the first time I have the opportunity to work for and with indigenous communities. So I am very thankful for having this opportunity. I'm very thankful to you for having me here. So let's go through what brought me here, which is a action research protocol that we are still designing at the Research Center of CHUM. I work with Stephanie Marsan and Julie Bruno, who are the physicians, part of the research team. We are working in a partnership with PAC, Projet Autochtone du Québec, which is an indigenous organization that supports homeless indigenous people in Montreal. So the title of the project is Holistic and Culturally Safe STTBI Healthcare, Provision for Homeless Indigenous People in Montreal, but this, as I will explain later, is broader than only STBBI healthcare. So some element of background, as I said, the Pan-American history of colonialism and dispossession have dispossessed indigenous people of their land, their worldviews, their spirituality as well, and produce the connection with their identity and also their territories at all levels, so all the levels of the self, but also at family levels, at community levels, and at nation levels. So this, I would say, multifocal or multidimensional rupture also or often is accompanied by the lack of stable housing, or in some cases by a continuous circular moving between indigenous communities and urban areas such as Montreal. So some element of statistical official data. There is few data about homeless indigenous people in Quebec, in the Quebec province, and in Montreal in specific, but this is from the Public Health Agency of Canada. 1 in 15 indigenous people experience homelessness across Canada, compared to 1 in 128 among non-Indigenous Canadians. In Quebec, the economic situation of Indigenous people is very poor. 2/3 of them earn less than $20,000 a year. A third are unemployed, and only 45%, 45% don't have a high school diploma. In terms of STBI incidence and prevalence, as you may know, the incidence of hepatitis C is 3 times higher among Indigenous people compared to non-Indigenous Canadian. There also, the prevalence of hepatitis B is also higher among Indigenous populations. And in terms of HIV, the incidence rate is about 11%, when they only represent more or less 5% of the entire Canadian population. The main risk factors are injecting drug use and unprotected sex, including sex work. In terms of the experience with public health services or public services in general, this is data from a survey conducted by a network of Indigenous organizations in Quebec in 2017 or 16, sorry. 57% of Indigenous people declare having been victim of racism when using public services network in Quebec. And the main barriers to access healthcare they identify is language and culturally inadequate practices and resources. So they are, in terms of the specific care for STBBI health conditions, there are a considerable disconnect between the priorities and the experiences of Indigenous people within the Canadian healthcare system. So current needs, obviously, Indigenous people are currently, most of them, or a majority, experience deprivation, where they don't benefit from the Canadian public services or the wellness of Canadian society, I would say. And they are in urgent need to improve the qualities of services in Quebec, but I would say, I think across Canada. So for this purpose, the Project Autochtone Quebec has been working for a while with the hospital in an informal way, and this project is the formalization of this partnership, and the objective is to implement some traditional medicine and healing practices within the hospital setting. So, in terms of, in a more theoretical perspective, Indigenous knowledge and way of knowing have been, because of colonialism as well, under the epistemic oppression of Western hegemonic science and knowledge, which are considered not only in Canada, but globally, the only valid understanding of the world. So this project, the aim of this project is to combine Western and Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing by adopting the so-called two-eyed seeing framework, which will include epidemiological, social science perspective, but also Indigenous knowledge, and which are based, as you said, in observation, experiential learning, and the interaction, and which is something that I think challenging, but very important, the interaction with other universe entities. So in that regard, what we are looking for is to implement a sort of rebalance approach to health and wellness from the epistemological perspective. So this is a diagram I prepared, which summarizes our vision of the health and wellness of Indigenous people, the vision based on which we want to work. So, as you know, the 4 dimensions of the self, their interaction with the context, social, economic, political context, and the way in which different systems of oppression, notably colonialism, but also capitalism and patriarchy, which are concomitant and complementary systems of oppression have a negative impact on the wellness and the health of indigenous people. So we consider that all these highly prevalent health conditions like HIV, hepatitis C, but also substance drug dependence and tuberculosis and other chronic disease as the biological and psychological responses of reactions also, and also could say direct consequences of the oppression of indigenous people within the colonial society, of the colonial rule. So you know the historic trauma and from the medical anthropology perspective, the embodiment of these negative experiences, life experiences. So we also, as the previous presentation, will integrate the intersectionality approach, which is seen in that context as a tool, methodological and theoretical tool coming from the Western critical theory. And the idea is to use it to identify a specific subgroup among homeless people in Montreal that are, because of their identity, but also because of different, or the location at the intersection of different systems of oppression, experiences specific difficulties and barriers to access healthcare. I am thinking about women, but also gender non-conforming people and indigenous youth. So what we are planning to do is to, during the first year, to set up a diagnosis and to use this information to elaborate a 4 years peer-driven program aimed at combining, as I said, these two approaches, so biomedicine, but also indigenous medicine and healing practices within the hospital. So an holistic approach to indigenous health and wellness. And as we acknowledge that the difficulties indigenous people encounter when trying to access healthcare are based on racism, we also have a component that will facilitate the implementation of such an holistic approach to healthcare by applying a cultural security approach and training for health care professionals. So these are the 4 objectives that I already ran over. So the identification of needs, the identification of level of knowledge among healthcare professionals of this perspective, but also the principles and values of cultural security. And to facilitate, and to also, we would like to know and to identify what are the administrative and organizational barriers to implement this sort of service, on this sort of healthcare provision on a permanent way, on a permanent basis at the hospital. So for this purpose, we have these 3 work packages. So the one focus on indigenous populations, health and wellness, the other one more focus on the identification of what is necessary in terms of training for care professionals, and the third one to identify what are the facilitators and obstacles to implement this project on a permanent basis in the future. In terms of methodological principles, our methodological approach is based on the First Nation principles of respect, equity, and reciprocity. And we are setting up, thanks to the collaboration of PAC, but also to the collaboration of FIS recently, a advisory committee, thank you, advisory committee that will guide us throughout the whole project at all these stages, at the design, the implementation, and the evaluation of the project. And this advisory indigenous committee will be composed by knowledge keepers, elders, and two-spirit persons. So in terms of data collection, we will use classic mixed method approaches, but also the intersectionality, as I said, to identify the different populations and different needs related to this population. And also we will try to identify what are the perceptions of the among the healthcare professionals to understand what will be our target in terms of deconstruct this misconception and racist perceptions of indigenous people. We will evaluate this project at the third and fifth year. So we will set up a baseline during the first year, and then we will assess the short and long effect of the project, as I said, at year 3 and 5. So obviously the project findings and their dissemination will be validated with indigenous communities, the advisory, Indigenous Advisory Committee I talk about, and to assure the interpretation and also the use of this knowledge that we produce together is in accordance with their culture and values. So what we plan to do is that I am aware that this is sort of hard task and a long way before us, but we want to transform somehow the hospital culture to improve clinical management by incorporating traditional healing practices and to close the gap in terms of health outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians, produce data which is lacking, and also to improve, in the end, healthcare services for Indigenous peoples and their health and well-being. This is some of our references. So, thank you. Yes, I mean, I think in that case, as in other cases, we have to, we decide to act on the aspect we are able to have an impact. In that case, within this is the idea of the hospital to act to improve their work and the service they propose to Indigenous communities by incorporating this different or complementary approach. But as you say, definitely the problem is not that. I mean, this is one of the problems, or probably one of the consequences of the situation the people find themselves. And through this type of project, we don't attack the main cause of the problem. I would say that we are in a sort of secondary level. I don't know how to resolve the main problems on the main determinants of health, as you say, which are more rooted more deep in Canadian society and in colonial societies or post-colonial, so-called post-colonial society. So I don't think we are able to, apart from the support that PAC, for instance, gives to homeless people, apart from that, at our level, I don't think we are able to resolve the main problem, which is the dispossession and the deprivation, which are the real factors or the real cause of the problem they have. But we decide to act on our level, at our level of intervention or possibilities within our possibilities, I would say.
Any other questions? Thanks for the easy question.
It's not that.
Good afternoon. This question may be relevant to what your research is looking at, but I'll just throw it at you anyways. So when it comes to healthcare, health and well-being, and having Indigenous principles and paradigms involved, will your research look at, or will you come across, or will be asking the question of looking at the concept of good, like the good death or a bad death? And so within a good death and a bad death, there's a narrative within our culture of how to honor that process. Within the healthcare system, they're not known of these concepts and these processes. Is this something by chance that you guys are going to be looking at, or has it come up yet in terms of improving healthcare?
Yeah, another easy question.
I just want to clarify. So you're talking about cultural, being culturally sensitive to the dying process. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, I think this is one of the I would say the challenge we have, not the only one, but one of them. And I think that's why we decided to work in close relationship and close collaboration with Indigenous communities and Indigenous representatives themselves, because we as, I mean, the research team, but also me, because of what I start explaining, I don't necessarily have this cultural background, and it probably is not necessarily easy for me to understand this also. But for me, this is one of the main intellectual and ethical challenge, is to be able to not only to understand this and to approach this, but also to understand healthcare professionals of how important it is for other people to respect, to follow their own cultural practices and to be respected in doing so. And that's why I say it's a hard task we have, because I surmise that not everyone is open to this rebalance, epistemologically rebalance approach to health. And what your question is exactly that. I mean, there are other ways to accompany people, not only during the end of their life, but throughout life. There are other elements, there are other things that are important beyond biomedicine, and that as important as biomedicine, to feel good, to feel safe, to feel in connection with oneself and in connection with others. So these are things we cannot do alone. We're definitely not able to do alone, and that's why we need to work with Indigenous communities to help us in understanding and to help us in make possible to us to make healthcare professionals to understand that and to accept that. Thank you.
There is. Yes.
Thank you, Jessica, for the wonderful presentation. I have a quick question on the methodology part. So which cohort you studied, like homelessness, you said that the Indigenous homelessness, either they are from the shelter, or who are were in shelter, or who are were in encampment, like which cohort you studied?
Most of them are living rough in the city town of Montreal, and they are accompanied by different community-based organizations that accompany them to the hospital when they need some health care, and accompany them throughout the consultation. So they are referred by and accompanied by indigenous representatives that act as translators most of the time, but also as cultural mediators. So that's the way they arrive there at the hospital. But this is, as I explained, is still informal. They arrive there, but they are not an official place or the official role within the hospital or the.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Another question? Anna, okay. Okay.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica, for sharing that. If you don't know, CAN will be in Montreal this summer at AIDS 2022. Also, we have an Indigenous pre-conference happening. Please come over and visit. Glad to have you there. Oh, yes. So we have one more this afternoon. Chelsea Perry. Come on up. The price is right.
Hi, everyone. So I'm thankful to be here on Treaty 1 territory, on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene people, and the homelands of the Red River Métis. I also wanted to acknowledge that the work that I do and the project that I'm going to be talking about today is on the homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, where I also live as well. So next slide, please. About myself, I'm of mixed heritage of Niska and Haida ancestry from my mother's side, as well as mixed European ancestry, English, Scottish, and French from my father's side. And I'm a member of the Niska First Nation. Oh, thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Like, you can't see my photos, so my nice family photos. I'm a sister, a child of two wonderful parents, a partner. I'm a part of the LGBTQ community, and I'm a first year's Master's of Science student at Simon Fraser University. This is my family, the people who call me home. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a very recent study that I've been working on called The Impacts of the COVID-19 Pandemic on Access to Routine Healthcare Amongst Indigenous Women in Vancouver, BC. So we know that health literature consistently discusses how Indigenous people have worse access to quality healthcare than other populations around the world, and that Indigenous peoples face unique barriers to accessing healthcare services. It's also important to note that research on health disparities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples does not mean that Indigenous peoples are inherently sick, but rather that they are experiencing the ongoing and historical impacts of colonial violence and ongoing racism that continues to impact the health and well-being of Indigenous peoples. So despite healthcare services being generally more plentiful in cities, Indigenous populations in urban areas still face significant barriers to accessing healthcare. And in Canada, the role of racism significantly impacts Indigenous people's access to healthcare services, and that's been well documented in reports such as the In Plain Sight report from the BC Health Commission. And previous studies have also shown that sex workers and women living with HIV who identify as a minority gender face increased barriers to healthcare access in Vancouver. And early and consistent access to primary care is an important and sustainable treatment for HIV care. There's also significant health gaps within research on Two-Spirit and gender diverse Indigenous people, and more work needs to be done to address the health needs of Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people. So for the purposes of this presentation, I will be using the term Indigenous, which encapsulates First Nations and Métis peoples, as well as Inuit, but I also want to recognize the diversity of these cultures and their languages among these groups. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm really bad at clicking this thing. So as I mentioned previously, ongoing colonial violence and gender-based violence continues to impact the health of marginalized populations, including Indigenous people, Two-Spirit, LGBTQ+, sex workers, and women living with HIV. And there is a need to understand how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted these social and structural barriers to accessing health. The impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have left gaps within the knowledge that and it's not only essential to address how, but also in preparation for future pandemics within the health system. So the goal of this study was to examine difficulty accessing routine healthcare among Indigenous women during the COVID-19 pandemic in Vancouver, BC, focusing on broader structures of colonialism that continue to influence the everyday lives of Indigenous women and gender diverse people, and how these structures have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So this research draws on theoretical constructs of feminist intersectionality, socio-ecological, and reproductive justice frameworks, recognizing factors that impact people's everyday experiences, such as laws, policies, racialization, cultural identity, as well as health environments, so models of care, or even how people interact with their providers. This research also draws on Indigenous frameworks. It's important in health research that it's conducted in a way that's capturing Indigenous voices and experiences, drawing on Indigenous frameworks of research, thinking about reciprocal accountability, the prioritization of community voices, which is essential for providing recommendations to improve the health and the well-being of Indigenous peoples. Decolonizing research, health research, involves evaluating and reflecting on structures that are supporting colonization and racism against Indigenous peoples. It's important to understand that decolonization is a way for Indigenous people to speak about their own experiences and reality, and not having non-Indigenous researchers speaking about it for them. It's important that research is conducted in a way that's capturing Indigenous voices and perspectives and focusing on appropriate and responsive research that is linked to a community-driven agenda. So thinking about how we are gathering knowledge, what are we doing with it? Why does this research need to be done? Is this research what the community wants done? Are we ensuring that our research is in line with the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation, Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women Calls to Justice, and In Plain Sight report? And also thinking about gaps within health research, such as the lack of research on Two-Spirit and gender diverse people, and thinking about their health and well-being as well, and ensuring that all facets of our research represent the population that we want to look at, adding in a thoughtfulness of when we are conducting research and how we are conducting research. I also wanted to note that this work is done in partnership with the Vancouver Coastal Health Director of Indigenous Women and Family Health, and the continuation of this work will be guided by the Matriarch Advisory Board, which consists of Indigenous matriarchs, elders, knowledge holders, researchers, community members, ensuring that we're privileging elder voices and community voices. So you might have heard, about these two cohorts, probably Shauna, because I think they've come and spoken here a couple times. So we created this cohort of Indigenous women, gender diverse and Two-Spirit people by pulling the data from both these cohorts, Aisha, an evaluation for sex workers' health access, Shauna, sexual health and HIV/AIDS longitudinal women's needs assessment. So we pulled the Indigenous data from both of these cohorts to create our Amplify project and our Indigenous women and gender diverse cohort. It's important to note that the questionnaires and surveys for both these cohorts were created by community members of people who are sex workers or have been impacted or have HIV in Vancouver, BC. And this makes the data very powerful because it was created by these communities for informing actionable change for these communities. So this study, the Amplify project, is led by Dr. Brittany Bingham and involves working with this nested community-based cohort of Indigenous women, cisgender and transgender, and Two-Spirit people. And data is collected every 6 months. And we implemented a COVID-19 questionnaire right after COVID happened. And then that's how we collected data for this study that we'll be talking about today. So by having an only Indigenous cohort, we're making sure that this data from these two cohorts is actually examined and looked at through an appropriate lens, research that is guided by, led by, and for Indigenous peoples. So the data was drawn from the two community-based cohorts of Indigenous women and Two-Spirit sex workers and women living with HIV in Vancouver, BC, our Amplify project. And we examined social and structural variables to see what correlated with difficulty accessing a family doctor, a nurse, a clinic for routine healthcare during the COVID-19 pandemic. And by partnering with the Indigenous Matriarch Board for feedback and guidance, we're ensuring that this research has this continuous loop of feedback and is guided by Indigenous people and is representative about what elders and community members are seeing within community. Okay, so we found among 143 Indigenous women, 28% of the sample reported difficulty accessing a family doctor, nurse, or clinic for routine healthcare during the COVID-19 pandemic. 48% of our sample reported as identifying as a gender or sexual minority. 22% had been in a married or common law relationship. 55% really rated their health as good, and 74% had been pregnant in the past, and 94% had experienced violence by any perpetrator in the past. In our multivariate analysis, which was adjusted for gender and sexual identity, participants who had ever been pregnant experienced negative changes in psychological and emotional well-being, lacked access to culturally safe health services, had concerns regarding safety or violence within their community, had the highest odds of difficulty accessing routine healthcare during our study period. And those in a married or common law relationship actually had the lowest odds of difficulty accessing routine healthcare, which shows us the importance of having a support system, the importance of having culturally safe care, and feeling safe in one's community are all important aspects in accessing routine healthcare. So the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted social and structural health inequities for Indigenous women and gender diverse people. And as I said before, negative changes in psychological and emotional well-being, a history of pregnancy, and concerns for safety or violence within one's community were associated with difficulty accessing routine healthcare during the COVID-19 pandemic. This study further supports the urgent need for accessible, culturally safe, trauma-informed routine healthcare for urban Indigenous women and gender diverse peoples during the current and future pandemics. It's vital to the health and well-being of Indigenous women and gender diverse people that healthcare services prioritize Indigenous pregnant people and caregivers as well. As we did see, people who had a history of pregnancy had some of the highest or most difficulty accessing routine healthcare. And the continuation of community-based and collaborative research, as well as the prioritizing of community voices and inclusion of gender diverse and Indigenous peoples, is crucial for creating actionable change to address the existing health gaps within our health system, continuing to amplify Indigenous voices to inform actions to support culturally safe health services, social well-being, and justice for Indigenous people. The continuation of this research is crucially needed given the recent findings in the BC Ministry Health Commissioned in Plain Sight report, as well as contributing to the ongoing work of the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, Calls to Justice, and Truth and Reconciliation, Calls to Action. Research that prioritizes community voices is needed to inform culturally safe, trauma-informed, and gender-inclusive health services. So as we continue to unpack the impacts of as we continue to unpack the historical and ongoing impacts of colonial violence on Indigenous peoples, this research will continue to amplify Indigenous community voices and inform actions to support culturally safe access to care. So, because we're using disaggregated data for this cohort of our Amplify project of Indigenous women, powerful statements can be made by using disaggregated data. And as highlighted in the grandmother's report, we need to be using disaggregated data as a tool of care. So ensuring that we're using this data to support the hard work that's been put into, as I mentioned before, the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous report. And then, as I said as well before, like partnering with the Indigenous Matriarch Board really creates that continuous loop of that reciprocal accountability of that we're accountable to the elders and they're accountable to us and accountable to the community members. And we hope to create discussions about these results with Indigenous women and gender diverse people who engaged in this research. And it's vital that we make sure that the data from this cohort of Indigenous women and gender diverse people is used in a way that reflects the needs of the community. Continuous engagement with the community to create actionable change to support the needs of the community, this ongoing cycle of engagement. In gratitude to the community members, the Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people who took the time and energy to share their knowledge and experiences. We hope this research will give back to the community of Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people. MIYOWÂCIMOW, thank you, everyone.
Are there any questions?
Do you have the opportunity to evaluate how were the health services that they received before COVID-19? Or this is only a snapshot?
Did you say that, did we do research like prior to
Yeah.
COVID-19? Yes, there have been multiple studies with both the Aisha and Shauna cohorts. Pulling the Indigenous data from these two cohorts is a very recent thing. And we just did, we got a CIHR grant of a rapid COVID response. And that's what we put out the COVID supplement questionnaire. And that's where this data comes from. So there is previous data from the Aisha and Shauna cohorts on access to care. But this is, just on COVID-19, this project, this Amplify project.
And compared with that, it was worse?
You know what? We're still in the early stages of the project. So I haven't done like a comparative analysis of prior or this, but that's a good thing to think about. And I'll definitely think about adding that in next time. Thank you.
Any other questions for our guest? Okay.
All good. Woo!
Thank you very much for the presentation. Here's a gift for you.
Thank you.
So thank you for staying with us this afternoon and listening to these wonderful presentations. The people that are online, thank you for zooming in on us. Remember, please, on your feed loop apps to do the feedback. That's part of the way we do our evaluation. And I know when I started this session, I said there didn't seem to be a theme. It looked like a lot of great wildflowers. The one theme I saw come out of this was the majority of the researchers doing this work are incredibly strong women. And having come from a house of, my house is full of women, I love it. Thank you very much for your energy and your strength in doing this research. Much appreciated. That is it for today. Please join us again tomorrow.